In this real side experience, I would be reaching out and making a contact with a particular species or body type. The exact reason for this was never made apparent to my personal self, as the impressions were never revealed from my real awareness. A real awareness that is part of all real awareness, which is this true reality, isness, everything, that is through all created consciousness and the ideas it comprises of, and so, what with the real awareness having access to everything assimilated as effected from all consciousness, so there is nothing of any experience the personal self can't be appraised of as to the details regarding. In another real side experience I have shared, I would be engaging in the rescue of a woman, a position in creation where she was contained by the dark forces, but bordering the area would be a curious woodland. At one point in that experience, I would be chased into the woods by agents of the dark forces, her captors, but the woodland seemed as though to comprise of various dimensions, that as one transitioned through the wood, so would one cross from one dimensional area to another. A slight shift would be experienced, and this was advantageous in that it made dark force pursuit of me an impossibility, as I would seemingly vanish before their eyes, and they would attempt to follow, but only could do so successfully if they crossed the exact point in the wood I had, that they could enter the same dimension I had stepped into, etc. However, the woodland, a kind of a conglomeration of various dimensions, wasn't a part or extension of the dark forces and their operation. It was just simply there seemingly, and overall it appeared to be the lair and domain of all manner of twisted and distorted body types, many of which appeared more animal-like, some more bipedal, but all were insectoid in their overall design. And as I said, their realm, area in creation, wasn't in any way affiliated with the dark forces, neither were all the beings that resided there, but their overall consciousness was of a malign and aggressively obtrusive design, inclined toward malevolence and antagonism. These insect beings and their domain then would be categorized as the ill-intended, and really then their body forms and creational positioning, a very dark and forbidding series of dimensional areas, all incorporated within the curious wood that contained them, was an effected reflection of the nature of their created consciousness, just as distorted, in other words. What transpired in the rescue experience, however, was that the woodlands of dimensions and insectoids, although only an additional feature of that experience, would be the focus of another experience I would have a week or so later. As I said in the beginning, I was to make a contact with a particular species, evidently one either stepping up or one wishing to participate in the galactic projects, a species choosing to be real, in other words, and the real guides will determine these individuals and species, and oftentimes offer those agreeable the assignment to make a contact, as it were. And where this species was located were within the very woods of darkness that housed all the dimensional areas where the various twisted insect-like body types resided, that I had briefly encountered in the other real side experience, where I had simply used it as a convenient means of escape. It may well have been an area of the lower astral, appearance-wise, a dark and a dismal creational spot indeed, or somewhere just as foreboding, overall like a huge gloomy swamp land, and as I said, it comprised of various dimensions. In the other experience, as I was pursued by the dark forces, my pursuers and myself had the ability to cross these dimensions of darkness at will, but each dimension housed its own particular insectoid-like species that were resigned to the dimensional area within the overall wood they were in. For generally, the more we can access of a creation effected from our consciousness, a consciousness as a part of all consciousness that effects and is the simulator with its multi-dimensional construct, the more we simply are removing that which prevents us from doing so. We limit our positioning by what we decide, focus on, are locked into agreement with, etc. And so, the more of the ideas, agreements, attachments of the consciousness we face and release, the less we are bound by them, the less we are limited by them. This would include positioning in creation. And so, as we go about this process, we increase our creational access until we have full access to everything, as it were, as we have released all that which denied it. And so, whereas I could transition through these dark dimensions, the beings that resided there were resigned to their particular areas. And overall, the particular inclination of all these twisted insect beings was to bestow harm on others, their decided brand of thrill-seeking. For as I entered this dark realm, as I traversed through the dimensions of it to reach a particular area, an area where the particular insect beings I was to engage with resided, seems that periodically would all these various insect beings manage to capture humans and whatever other beings and body types they could get their hands or mandibles on, drag them to this realm and subject them to tortures and insidious abuse. Everything agreement dependent, as all simulated experiences shared between individuals are, and so seemingly agreement was within the victim's consciousness that these insect nightmarish beings could bring them here and abuse them in this fashion, however and whenever such agreements were installed. That I would walk through unmolested was a testament to the fact that I lacked such agreements. In fact, the species I had come to engage with, although I would never reach the point of actually making a visual contact with them, impressions revealed were a form of sentient, spider-like body types that, although had been more ill-intended inclined, hence their body types and creational positioning, now were either stepping up or willing to assist the guides, as I said. I and others have encountered spider beings before on the real side. Some look like typical earth-bound spiders, though generally much bigger. Some more so a combination of a spider and a humanoid. Spider legs with a human-like body, limbs and head, etc. And although agreeable to be engaged with, agreeable to afford assistance, to step up in some way, they still had their attitudes, as you might expect, from such a distorted consciousness. It seemed these spider beings were the top species in this overall dark realm, and were considered somewhat as royalty by all others, and throughout all the dimensions of it. And as I entered their dimensional area, so I would be encased in webbing, as though an automatic snare that secured all those who trespassed upon the lair of these spider beings. I had the impressions I could easily have escaped this snaring, as the real awareness can deal with all situations, assuming the personal self doesn't hold to idea agreements which resigns it to certain predicaments, but that as I was dealing with the attitudes of these spider beings, it seemed prudent to allow them to capture and contain me, as they would all others encroaching into their territory, to stroke their ego, as it were, as almost as an acknowledgment to their power, that they would be more apt to engage on a civil footing, rather than my dismissing their authority, that my walking through their webbing snare would be construed as. And so there I waited in my webbing, as the spider beings were set to enter the scene. Alas, the experience stopped there, as often the scenes and situations can be cut off rather abruptly for various reasons, almost sometimes like a series on TV, where each episode stops at an exciting edge-of-the-seat moment to encourage you to tune in for the following episode. In the next and altogether different scene, I would find myself with a group of individuals of the becoming more aware persuasion, and it seemed we were practicing various newly acquired abilities on the physical, as though imbued with recently gleaned capabilities. For indeed, in a real side experience I shared relatively recently, would all the new friends be gathered in a kind of library, where an individual taking the stage, as it were, would inform us that as we continue with our process, as we release ideas in the consciousness that effect as limitation, so we become less limited, so we begin to bring forth and are able to utilize all manner of abilities, and this scene on the physical would be a hint at this possibility, for predominantly we were practicing the skill of being able to pass through what would be solid objects, through the walls of buildings, etc. As everything is a simulation, computer-like graphics, nothing is actually solid. However, everything simulated comprises of a certain electromagnetic frequency, and the closer these frequency fields are in relation to each other in polarity terms, the more they repel each other, like magnets with the same charge, etc. This presents as the illusion of solidity. And so, a house, for example, has a similar polarity frequency-wise as our physical body vehicles, and so we would refer to buildings as a solid, and we can't pass through them. However, were one to have the ability to alter the electromagnetic polarity of the body vehicle at will, then one could walk through walls, walk on water, the air could become as solid in relation to our bodies, and we could, say, levitate or fly just as easily as we can swim through water. And there are examples of individuals throughout human history who can do this. Evidently, they had the ability to shift their electromagnetic polarities of their body vehicles at will. And this was what my group and I were doing here, in what was in reality then a future view, a glimpse of possible things to come. After all, anything's possible in creation. It's simply idea agreements consciously installed that affect their simulated nature. The scene would switch, and it was as though the same group and myself were battling through a complexity of changing scenes. We're standing as opposition to our objective, that of reaching the end, would be an endless array of dark force opposition. This could be representational of our process of awareness, as all ideas that creation comprises of are as snares, that which can draw us back into a creation and the personal self, but only if we allow it, if we agree to the ideas. This would include the ideas that are the body forms of others and their creations. Overall, creation is one big mire, or sinking pit, and we must as though walk through and past all the ideas it comprises of, for one idea is enough to have us submerged into a creation if we latch onto it. Battling with the dark forces would still be an engaging with the ideas that they are and are presenting, which is a tantamount to agreement, but in this experience we were constantly moving forward, and so suggesting we were not being mired by the ideas, the battles we were seemingly engaged with. Oftentimes, in my real side experiences, as the dark forces attempt to attack us, they meet the effects of their own decided abrasiveness, and only if we have agreement that they can successfully harm us will this be our simulated experience. Absent of this agreement, then, so our attackers' efforts will not succeed, and this can be expressed in various simulated ways, such as they being bested or their efforts put down in some oftentimes over-exaggerated way, that the experience sit more so in the memory on awaking. And this would be the situation here, as though we were overall on assignment, the group and I, but were meeting a constant and heavy resistance, but lacking agreements that our attackers could harm us. So this was expressed as a constant battle, but one where we emerged victorious and proceeded on, and eventually we found ourselves in another place, absent of dark force attackers, etc. Waiting for us would be an individual that impressions revealed was a real guide, and we would present as though a report on our assignment to her. The details I fail to recall on waking. However, at that moment, a huge giant of a being manifested in our presence, standing as though 100 feet in height, and he immediately would be motivated to attack us. But despite his best efforts, seemed he was unable. Agreements lacking, therefore, which effected as simulation, devoid of his ability to bestow harm upon us. He would cease then what was a fruitless effort, as we had simply stood there, his fists raining down upon us, fists the size of ourselves that had merely bounced ineffectually off our bodies, evidently in affiliation with the dark forces, as an extension of the resistance we had previously endured. He now would loftily refer to himself in a large booming voice as the Prince to the Prime Being, so clearly he was some being of renown and status, second only to whoever the Prime Being was. No impressions would I receive regarding his claims, and the scene would end there. One final scene, however, and it was so that we were to attend an alien party, or social event seemingly, almost as a kind of infiltration, as though to mingle and perhaps contact a particular being or body type or group that were attending. The same group and myself from the previous scene would rendezvous with the same individual. The one I impressioned was a guide, also from the previous scene, in a house, where she would present us with our infiltration assignment, and based on the nature of it that we were to blend in unnoticed, so it was prudent to have our forms match that of the alien body types that would be present. She would wave her hand through the air, and our body types would alter. Our forms were hard to describe. No alien body type that I had ever seen as depicted in art or drawing form, so certainly a rather unique species to be sure. All I really remember was that they had very long necks that were held parallel to the ground. Their bodies were completely nonsensical to my personal self, description defying, but were of a pinkish, reddish coloration. They were either fur-covered or feathered, very intellectually developed and technological a species also. They were not ill-intended or dark force affiliated, just another expression of a body type going about its decided business in creation, a species that wasn't especially welcoming to others, not of its own kind. Hence the necessity of our forms resembling their own, that we could make a contact with whoever it was we were to engage with at their party gathering. And so the scene faded, and we were walking toward the front entrance of a grand and brilliantly lit building, one of a design unlike anything I had seen before. These alien beings certainly were fine architects, and it was here that the party would be hosted. As we approached rather awkwardly in body forms that took a little getting accustomed to, we would enter, we would mingle, we would blend in and successfully avoid drawing attention upon ourselves. The scene would fade at that point, however, and the experience would end there. And so, sing the new you song. It is your connection to the real universes, the true reality all life is, that your real awareness, the true being of light that you really are, is a part of. New you.